Hey everybody, it's Dave Clark, aka the Pattern Guy. We're going to do a segment. We're going to start doing some, we're going to call them chalk talks. I'll show you some hands-on videos of how I do certain things and that, but one of the things I was looking at last week is terminology, okay? And I started explaining why it's important to know the different terminologies, and I kind of got sidetracked. That happens to me a lot of times. You know, I'm going to go over things over and over and over. I'll try not to as much as I can, but I'm assuming nobody knows anything, so I want to make sure everybody gets the, you know, full terminology for everything. So here's basically a little sketch that I did, and then I have a pattern here too where we can, you know, I'll go over it with you also. So anyhow, you have a match plate, okay? Now I'll just bring this over here right off the bat here. Okay, this is a match plate, okay? So this represents my match plate, okay? And then what happens is I got to mount a pattern to it, okay? So this red piece will be the pattern, okay? This represents my pattern right here, okay? That's the pattern. All right, and I've heard people call them dies, molds, that it's a pattern, okay? Dies are metal, use them for stamping and that. The molds, I'll show you how to make molds off of the pattern down at the foundry, okay? So if you're casting, this is a casting that we made off of this pattern, okay? If it's got a hollow spot on it, so this is hollow, this actually is a light for a 15 gauge train locomotive. I do a lot of train parts, okay? So this is for a 15-inch gauge locomotive. All right, this is actually the tender. You have the locomotive and then the thing that holds the coal in the water, that's called the tender. This is a tender light, okay? So I had a customer of mine, he's actually a good friend of mine too, Jesse Bannings from Banning Locomotive Works. He just acquired Little Engines and that, so yeah, I do a lot of work for him. We collaborate on some jobs and that. So we made this for Jesse for a customer, and I also made the locomotive light. But this is a tender light. I got all the equipment here, okay? So we needed to make a hollow spot in here. So this is what was we did this with a core, okay? We poured this out. So here's the core box to this. Okay, so what they do is they put both of these together, fill it full of a sand with a binder in it, and then they put CO2 gas to it, open this up, and real quick, let me put this over here. Alright, sorry about that. So this would represent my core, okay? So what we do is we call this a core stick. Okay, we make the core sticks to make the core box, okay? It's easier to make a male part than it is to make a female. So in the old days when my dad was a pattern maker, I'll show you the urethane. This is actually urethane in here, okay? I'll show you that in a minute. What he would have to do, my dad would have to do, and guys like in the 50s and 60s maybe before they had the urethanes, they would literally have to carve this out. You know, they do it on a machine or you know, hand carve a lot of the stuff. They just like make it in sections and that. Back then you had a little more time to do things, you know, things like that. Well, newer technology now, it's just easier for me to go on a lathe, turn this section up on the lathe, you know, build this, glue it on. And then what I do is put this down on a board, put a frame around it. You know, this is, oh yeah, you can see. Put a frame around it, and then I poured urethane in there to get this impression, okay? So going back down to the foundry, you know, what they would do is put this together, fill it full of sand, harden it, and then they would get, say this is sand in the foundry, so that would be your core, okay? So it'd be all sand, and the reason they make it out of sand and that is once this casting solidifies, you want to knock it out so you get your hollow spot, okay? So just say this is this here. So you got your pattern on your pattern board, okay? And then these are what's called core prints, okay? And that's represented on here by this black piece right here. Well, that's another thing too. We color code the patterns, okay? So different foundries want different colors for their patterns. Core prints, and then sometimes there's loose pieces, so they want like yellow or whatever. First foundry I worked in, Pattern Shop Foundry, we did silver patterns, black core prints. When I started my shop, kind of modeling it after my dad's, where he did his apprenticeship, they did red patterns and black core prints. So that's the color combination of what I do, okay? And then, so what happens is, when they take this down into the foundry, the guy that's molding this, right, knows that he's got to have a core to go in this job. So they'll have the core made, he'll make his mold, and then he'll place the sand core in the mold, and then one that, like I said, when the metal solidifies, they'll knock it out and get a hollow spot you're casting. Okay, so back to some more terminology here. Okay. So you got your core prints, and that's actually where the core will hang into the mold. I tell you what, we'll do this. I'll do this job down at the foundry when we get it. Okay, so you can see on this side, it's just round, cylindrical. That's basically the shape of the core. And on this side, I got this big rectangular piece on here. Okay, so this is called a key. All right. So this particular core, say this is your core, it comes out the one side here, all right, but it's a dead end here. It's a blind end, right? So the example that I have, it's like a through cylinder, kind of like this casting right here, okay? The hole goes through both ends. So this is kind of typical to this. So I could have a core print on each side where the core would hang in there. So I just have to have a cylindrical core print, all right, because it's hanging both sides. This one, it's a blind hole, so this core has to be held up. This end, there's nothing to hold on to it. So in the mold, there will be a hole where this key will set in there, and that key will hold the core print, you know, steady in the mold, okay? And then once the top half, the cope half, comes down, it'll sit on there and kind of hold it a little bit more steady. Like I said, it'll be way easier when I go down to foundry to show you how to do this. All right, so we're just doing kind of an overview, all right? So the most important terminology too is, okay, the bottom of the pattern is called the drag, the top is called the cope. Okay, cope and drag, and like I said last time, I want to get, you know, I keep this PG, but the way I learned how to do this literally was, you know, you're dragging ass. It's on the bottom, okay? So drag's on the bottom, cope is on the top, okay? Now I got this thing here, it's called parting, okay? It's on both sides of the board. So I got parting here, parting there, okay? This is perfectly cylindrical. So most patterns are in two halves, okay? So they're not all cylindrical, they could be rectangular or whatever, but mostly they're in two halves, okay? So you have what's called a parting. And if you see on a lot of manufactured goods, and like this, you can see this line around here, that's called the parting line, okay? That's where the two halves come together, okay? So that's your parting. And I got off again too. The reason you got to know the terminology, you got to go to your customer and he gives you a drawing. So you got to ask him, okay, where do you want the parting line to be? Say it's a rectangular piece, it's not obvious. Most cylindrical pieces are just right down the middle. All right, but a lot of rectangular parts and that, you want to keep as much of the casting in the drag as you can. As for gating purposes, we'll go over that a little bit more on that too. So you got to be able to go to your customer and say, hey, look, where do you want the parting on this part in that, okay? Then you have to be able to say, well, where do you want your core prints? How big do you want your core prints? Certain shops, want bigger core prints than other shops. Sand saver, a lot of guys, they don't care about the sand, they'll overuse it, whatever. Okay, so it's really important to know the terminology. And the other thing is too, some foundries use different terminology. Okay, on your flask, what we'll do is we'll put a box on here, okay, and they'll pour the sand in there, all right, make your mold. Well, on each half, on the drag half, they have pins sticking up, okay, and then the cope, they have bushings on the ears on these things, okay, they're called pins and bushings. Well, in some foundries, the first foundry that I worked at, they had two different size pins in your flasks, okay, so one was smaller and the other one was bigger, so we used to call the bigger one the king pin and the other side the slot pin, okay, and the reason for these was because when you put the two halves together, if somehow you got the box 180, the flash 180, you knew that, the king pin went in the, you can't switch them around, okay. Here again, most of my flasks are the same size pin, so I gotta watch, which side I have a mark on the flask, all right. But most foundries, they got king pin or slot pin, or some places call them head pins and a slot pin and that. So there is a little bit different terminology, okay. But for the most part, you wanna, have the same thing. Okay, now so you got your pattern board. One of the things we touched on last week too is gating again. And here again, you gotta know the terminology, because basically you wanna, you wanna ask your customer, this is called the runner right here, okay? So you wanna basically say, well, how big is my runner? 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch, 7/8 by 7/8, or whatever, What I do is, this is on top of this, let's do a little chalk talk here. Okay, back, magic of cameras. I got a new drawing on here. All right, explain a little bit more about what's going on. Okay, we're on the terminology. All right, so one of the biggest things is, like in the gating, it's what feeds the casting, where you pour the molten metal. All right, so what you start out with, you pour the molten metal, will go into what's called the sprue. Another thing too, world's worst speller, and that I should check this stuff out before I do it, but anyhow, so you pour the molten metal, it goes down the sprue, and it hits what's called the sprue bowl right here, okay? And then from the sprue bowl, goes into this runner here, all right? And then it goes into the casting in an end gate, okay? And then on top of the end gates, usually you have what's called a riser, okay? And the riser, when the metal solidifies, riser stays hot, molten a little longer, it'll continue to feed the casting. So, all right, I'll show you here on the pattern. Okay, so here's where the sprue will come out of the mold. Okay, we got a sprue cutter. We'll show that to you down at the foundry. Okay, so that's the cope half. In the drag, we have sprue bowl. This one's actually a little bigger than what I needed to. This is aluminum casting, it shrinks a lot, so you usually use bigger gating on here, okay? So then from the sprue bowl, it goes into the runner here, and then we got the end gate here, but on this particular job, we ended up putting like another bowl underneath the end gate where it goes into the casting here. And then I've got, what they do, I don't know if you can see this, here's, try it this way. You can see the end gate here, and you can see the end gate here, okay? So this is what they call contact. So when you're asking your customer, like, how much contact you need for your end gate going into your casting, what size. Since this is pretty much the same size cope and drag. We actually have contact in both the cope and drag. A lot of times you just put the contact in the drag. All right, and then this goes into the riser, okay? That's gating. Like I said, when we get down to the foundry, it'll clarify a lot of stuff when we go down to the foundry. So it'll be way easier showing you that. But that's basically, you know, most of the terminology. And I'm gonna be, every time I do something, I'm gonna show you. We'll actually do a segment on gating and that, show you how I make the gating and why we do it. First place I worked at, plant manager would come out, show me what to do as an apprentice. He suggested, they sent me to FPS or Foundry Society, the AFS, American Foundry Society. They have a school in Pennsylvania. So I went to the school for 2 weeks. It was a week non-ferrous metal gating and a week ferrous metal gating. All right, so I went there, so I knew what he was talking about. So yeah, it was pretty cool. The AFS, I don't know if they still do it. They used to. If you had issues gating a job, they would, you know, have a guy help you out with your gating. I don't know if they still do it, like I said. So yeah, we'll do a thing on gating. It'll be a little more clarified. Like I said, all gating is different. Every job is different. A lot of times what you do is you gate a job, take it down to the foundry, you get shrinkage somewhere, you got to do it over again, you know. So it's not, casting industry is the next oldest industry next to prostitution, believe it or not. They actually have castings they found are 5,000 years old. So you figure this business would be, you know, right out the bat, you know, we'd have it down pat right now. There are so many different variables with this, and if you start pattern making, if you start doing your own foundry work, don't get discouraged doing this stuff. It takes you, I did a 5-year apprenticeship, okay, 10,000 hours. It takes you a long time to learn how to use the machinery, how to sand things on the sander. Same thing when you go down to foundry. You know, I have a reason I'm doing this video is one of my customers, his son, actually built his own furnace. He's making plaques and that. So he'll call me up and, hey, this isn't filling all the way. Can you give me suggestions on how to gate things? So don't get discouraged right off the bat. You're going to make lots of mistakes. I've been in this business almost 40 years and I still make mistakes. You're going to do it. Try not to, especially when you're doing, you know, wood. If you cut a piece of wood out wrong, you know, you can go get another piece of wood. Do it on urethane. That's a different story. Some of them are more expensive than others. Like I said, some of those shrink also like metal. And, you know, it's a bummer. You pour a core box full of urethane, you take it apart a couple hours later, and there's a big shrink in it. So you got to cut that $200 worth of urethane out of the job and redo it. You know, that comes out of your pocket, you know. So don't get discouraged. You know, my best analogy is, I don't know if anybody golfs out there or you're a baseball fan. Golfers, to be a pro golfer, one of my customers is a semi-pro golfer. I asked him what it would take to get to be pro. He said, well, basically, pro guys have a golf club in their hand every day. Get that swing going, okay? So every day, those guys are, you know, practicing their swing. Same thing with baseball guys, right? Baseball players, they're in the batting cage every day to get that swing the same way, all right? So you're the same thing with us, is when you're on the bandsaw, it's going to take you a couple months to get accustomed to, you know, cutting real close to the line, things like that. You know, at first, you know, work on your accuracy first. Speed will come later, okay? So take your time cutting. All right, you don't have to whiz things through the bandsaw. Eventually, you'll see me working on it. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, so it's easy for me. Same thing with the sander. The sander takes a certain touch. You got to know when to, you know, put more pressure on the piece of wood and less pressure in that. It's, you know, I'll teach you all that as we're going along, but don't get discouraged. It's going to take you a long time to learn all of this stuff. I'm going to keep on going over the terminology, time after time after time after time. You know, learn all the different terminology. different tools. I'm sure I'll get the different tools out all the time. The same tools time after time, and I'll keep on telling you what it is and that, all right? So one of the things is, one of the things I want to show you real quick. Before I take off, I don't get paid, as I just said, I think in the last video, I don't get paid from anybody for advertising or anything. I'm just going to show you the products that I use in that, what I've been using. I've been using it for so long. There's probably new stuff that's coming out that I'm behind on. So YouTube again, go for it. Okay, so I told you I use urethane to pour this. Okay, so one of the companies I use, they're actually, I keep on saying I'm from Cleveland. I'm actually from outside of Cleveland, west side. I built a house down south in Medina, Ohio. Actually, in Valley City, Ohio is where I'm at. We're about half an hour south of Cleveland. But west of Cleveland, there's a company called Freeman Manufacturing. Okay, they do all pattern supplies. They make urethanes, fillets. You can't have sharp corners. We have to have a round corner. I'll go over that one of these days. They sell leather fillet. They sell wax fillet. I use plastic in mine a lot of times. One of the products they make I use a lot is called Repro 83. And it's 50-50. It's like runny milkshake consistency. You mix it 50-50 and you have your core stick. We'll mount that on a piece of plywood, put a frame around it and pour the Repro in there. And in a couple hours when it solidifies, you got a core box, okay? So like I said, these guys don't pay me. That's, one of the things that they make I use a lot. There's a couple other urethanes I use with them all the time. We'll show you those down the road. They bought, I mentioned Kent Collins. They're the ones that made the oscillating spindle sander and the disc sander. They went out of business, I think about 5 years ago. Freeman bought them out. Freeman's got a lot of good products. I like Kent Collins paint. So far, Freeman is keeping Kent Collins paint Kent Collins. So I hope they do. Kent Collins paint, we'll show you that later on down the road. It's expensive, but you need that for the chemicals that are in the sand. Okay, you can't just use regular house paint on the patterns. It just doesn't work. You gotta have some special paint. It's just expensive, but that goes on to your customers and that. So we'll get into some pattern making next time. I'll actually show you how to start laying patterns out. Gluing stock up. A lot of times you gotta glue the different woods that we use in that, and maybe another urethane or two. So until we get there, we'll see you. Everybody have a good one out there, all right?